Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ken Vrtis, and I'm the Vice President of Sales for VistaLogix. And joining me on the webinar today is Mike Skinner, President of VistaLogix. And on behalf of VistaLogix and our business partner, IBM, we'd like to welcome you to our 45-minute seminar. The topic today is how the new cloud-based TMS systems can quickly provide economic value for your supply chain. On the screen, you should see the agenda of what we want to cover today. We're going to touch on the TMS market and then focus a lot on the cost savings and case studies and what's involved. So, are TMS systems becoming table stakes? One of the displays we're showing here is stating the analysts believe that we are heading in that direction. Logistics Management publication believes almost 40% of the shippers have adopted the TMS technology, and certainly one of the reasons is savings. But in a tight marketplace with capacity and tough-to-find trucks, we're finding that many shippers have a goal of being easy to do business with as a strategy to secure capacity. So if you're an easier shipper to do business with, better chances of getting the truck. So ARC Group has forecasted a 6.8 annual growth in the SaaS or cloud models, and these are outselling some of the other basic TMS models by almost a 6-to-1 margin. Gartner's reporting savings in the range of 5 to 25% based on the shipper's mix of freight. Typically, we're seeing somewhere in the 5 to 12% range as the normal range. And at this time, what I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce Mike Skinner, who's the president of VistaLogix. He's been involved in the TMS market for almost 15 years, and before joining VistaLogix was a consultant for Ernst & Young. Mike?
Okay. One of the things that we want to do today is really share with you, just based on some of our experiences, our clients' and customers' perspective on transportation management systems. Certainly some of the drivers that we're seeing that are pushing shippers increasingly to migrate towards transportation management solutions. And then as the invitation and as the lead into the discussion really highlights, how and why our shippers are seeing such quick returns on their investment in this capability. You know, it's interesting as we get involved with dozens of shippers on an annual basis, and in the 30-plus implementations of TMS that we've done over the last several years. It's very surprising how varied the drivers are for our customers making this decision to go forward with this kind of technology. You know, we have customers that are simply looking for control. You know, for example, shippers that have significant numbers of carriers. We have one customer that has 300 flatbed carriers around the country in North America, and they're really looking for capability to tie all of that activity into one central repository. We've got shippers with significant shipping volumes out of tens or dozens of shipping facilities, really looking to control day-to-day activity across the board. You know, it's one thing as a central shipping organization to go through a great deal of effort to procure and strategize around carrier core programs and to put contracts in place and route guides, but the need to control that activity out at the plant level is one of the significant drivers to make sure that we're getting advantage of that on a day-to-day basis. Many of our customers are growing, and many times through acquisition. And what we see there is, as these companies are bringing on large organizations with multiple shipping facilities, there's a real need for this kind of technology to come in and assist them in controlling that growth. Because as we all know, the logistics department, despite significant growth in the organization, the logistics department typically does not add a lot of headcount. In fact, we're usually seeing things going in the other direction. Many of our customers are looking simply for better visibility Our customer base typically in the past has used customer delivery metrics of on time to ship, which is interesting and valuable. It helps to control and measure production planning and shipping operations, but it doesn't help to manage and control delivery. So again, a lot of drivers. In many cases, it's simply the cost. To answer up to finance, what have you done for me lately in terms of cost savings? And so as we look across all those varied shippers, we often see them coming into this process at a different point in the transportation life cycle. Many of our customers are needing to first get a much better bead on what their transportation network and in fact, their physical distribution network, both outbound and inbound, is like, and whether or not they've optimized location of facilities and carriers and contracts and so forth. So we see them coming in at the strategic end, looking to do first a network study, whether looking to realign the physical network or just simply realign how they're working with transportation providers. Others are pretty well set there, and they're looking to make sure that they have done a good job of procuring transportation in the past. So we see a lot of companies getting started with this process on the carrier procurement and strategy side by going through a benchmark. How do my rates compare to the market? How do my rates on certain lanes compare to my competitors on the same lanes? And then really using that information to launch into a bidding process and into a core carrier program in order to optimize that procurement activity. And still others are coming into this from the operational side, which is really the focus of this conversation, which is on the TMS, which is to say, I've got my network established, I've got my rates, my contracts with my carriers established. Now I need to do a better job of optimizing that day-to-day planning activity, both inbound and outbound, optimizing my full truckloads, making sure that I'm taking advantage of all of my capacity, using the system to automate the execution process, and then, of course, track my shipments from pickup through delays in transportation and into delivery, and then at the end of the day, to then audit freight bills, pay the carriers accurately, and capture all that data, which, as you can see in this feedback loop, really gets tied back into that overall strategic process. So we see best-in-class shippers really doing all of the things on this page relatively well. Procuring with the carriers at best-in-class rates, optimizing and planning and automating that transportation execution process, and then taking the results of that day-to-day, month-to-month activity in a reporting standpoint and feeding that back into the overall strategic network. At the end of the day, they've got to justify that. So one of the things we're going to focus on in this conversation is how do you do that? And as a transportation executive and manager, we have seen in many cases in the past, one of the biggest challenges in getting a TMS implemented is not the fundamental justification and the business drivers that are driving these decisions, but rather the internal selling. So selling up into senior management, selling up into finance, selling up into IT, that this is a viable project, and oh, by the way, it needs to pay for itself before you're too far down the road. So we've broken this discussion into a couple of different parts here, one of which is to talk about savings and where we see our companies driving savings, to talk a bit about the cost side and how we're seeing a lot of companies really drive or keep the costs down, both externally with the vendors they're bringing in and the technology they're acquiring, and also internally with regard to the implementation effort and activities that are required to get this kind of technology up and running. So to start on the cost saving side, it depends on the shipper, right? We have, let's see, 7 buckets of savings here. Some shippers are saving in all of these areas. Some shippers are saving in just a few key areas. As Ken mentioned earlier, we are seeing that the total combined savings on a customer-by-customer basis very solidly ranges in the 5 to 12% range. I think there are some rare examples where we see 20–25% savings, where you have significant opportunities to optimize and consolidate LTL freight into truckload freight and so forth. But again, we do typically see, in terms of transportation planning and optimization, optimizing your carrier selection, your carrier network, improving day-to-day productivity, so automating and streamlining the planning and execution process with your carriers. Certainly in the freight bill settlement side, we've been surprised over the years, over and over again, at how much is being wasted in terms of freight payment. And even companies that have automated a great deal of that freight payment process are still seeing significant savings when it comes to rolling the freight payment activities into a TMS. Certainly reducing the amount of effort and time required of logistics planners and coordinators and managers when it comes to visibility, providing customers quick feedback, providing customer service quick feedback on the current status of shipments, and alerting those individuals to those activities. TMS is ideally geared towards that. It can really streamline those activities pretty significantly. So there are real savings there as well. And then lastly, in the elimination of existing tools. Many of our customers are currently using, or have been in the past using, transportation systems and tools that carry cost. And so by implementing new technology, they're able to replace some of those costs on an ongoing basis. So those are really the key areas where we're seeing significant savings, and I'll actually be giving a case study, an example of one of our customers, and plugging in some numbers here in a little bit later. So that's managing the costs in terms of savings. Managing the savings, and that is obviously the primary plug-in to your ROI analysis. Now I just want to talk a little bit about the cost of getting there. So savings bucket is one thing. In terms of the cost of getting up and running in order to deliver these savings, just want to talk a little bit about the different models that we see in the market. Historically, Ken mentioned I used to implement transportation systems long before the cloud, and we would install client-server technology behind the company's firewall. It would take 3 or 4 months to buy and install software and get everything up and running, ready to deploy, and then a longer period of time to get up and running, and then adding the carriers to your network. And over the years, in the last 10 or 12 years, we've seen sort of that model emerge or evolve, essentially. And so I just want to make sure in the initial stages here to make some distinctions between the different models that we're seeing on the market. And most importantly, to make a distinction between what we consider a hosted solution versus a SaaS solution, or software as a service. So if you look at hosted solutions, and you hear this term in the industry quite often, it really refers to the same technology, right? So the same kind of TMS that has been on the market for 20 years, with the key difference that it's now behind somebody else's firewall, okay? So it is often presented and sold as an in-the-cloud service or a software as a service, but the reality is you've got a single shipper's worth of software, a single shipper's application tied behind somebody else's firewall, and then the bigger complication there is connecting to the carriers. So another major distinction here in the software as a service is not only is the software deployed in the cloud and remotely and not on your servers and so forth, the network of users, both shippers and more importantly carriers, comes with that community. So when we bring on a customer, we're seeing that the ability to add carriers to the network and add shipments and automate that carrier management process is enabled significantly by that existing carrier and shipper community. So just in brief, hosted solutions is not the same as SaaS. Cloud, well, is just another way of saying SaaS, frankly. Now, to be fair, there are a lot of technologies on the market that have emerged to enable other kinds of capabilities on the cloud. But when it comes to a TMS, hosted versus SaaS versus cloud, a cloud solution is really the same as a SaaS solution, if properly defined. Talked a little bit about why that matters. And let me just go into a little bit more detail. And this really does start to drive the overall conclusion and objective of the discussion here, which is managing both the time to implement as well as the costs to get up and running and really deliver this functionality. So just a little bit about that. So network connectivity and internal footprint. When we look at the capabilities of, or the onboarding requirements of traditional technology, say that software that's going on behind your firewall, there's a significant footprint from the IT side, and it's been one of the real drivers or one of the real barriers to a lot of companies getting this kind of technology in-house. Logistics comes to senior management, to the IT team, wanting new technology, and they get in line between 15 other priorities on the technology side. And by bringing in a SaaS type of solution, you're able to shortcut a significant amount of that IT activity that really drives that barrier to getting the approval. I've already talked a little bit about the network connectivity, but establishing that connectivity out to the carriers is critical. The benefit of a transportation management system is significantly enhanced by automating the communication with the carriers. Can I automatically book a shipment? Can I send a tender out without having to look at it and pick up the phone? Can I get responses from carriers? Can I do a broadcast out to 15 carriers as opposed to one carrier at a time? All of that functionality exists in most transportation management systems, but if you're not able to get the connectivity to the carriers established in a timely amount of time, a lot of that savings, a lot of the value goes straight out the window until all of your carriers are connected. So by plugging into a community, by plugging into an existing network, the ROI, the savings start to accrue significantly faster and earlier during the implementation. And then finally, in terms of the overall implementation timeline we've talked about, in terms of ongoing functionality improvements, enhancements to your software, the key here really is in keeping current with new functionality. So in a SaaS model, in a network deployed TMS, you're able to see the improvements that are brought on by all of the new implementations, all of the new thinking, all of the new activities, and each user is able to take advantage of that without going through a significant upgrade process. So that's where we're talking more about maintenance of value as opposed to timeliness of value, but it becomes a key decision point. So how does that all boil down into what we've pitched at the beginning of this discussion as a 3-month ROI? So just to give a quick case in point, and this is a very sort of realistic scenario that we've laid out here, and obviously every shipper is different. Every shipper has different freight spend and mix of freight, and as I mentioned, the savings can range pretty significantly. But what we've taken here is a shipper with, for example, $25 million worth of freight. And again, we do solidly see in a typical implementation savings in the 5 to 10 to 12% range. So we're assuming for the sake of this argument, and obviously a 3-month ROI is aggressive, so we're being aggressive on the savings. But we're assuming here a 10% savings on this kind of an implementation, which if you net that out over a 12-month period is roughly a $200,000 plus or minus. So the savings of $200,000 per month once you've accrued or once you've implemented capability here. We do see in terms of the implementation time, whereas historically we would see 9 to 12-month implementations, we are consistently seeing implementations that are fully up and running and fully live across, in many cases, 3, 4, 5 business units, 50, 100 shipping locations, 100 to 200 carriers in a 6-month period. So we're really able to deploy a significant amount of functionality in that timeline. And so at that, let's just take 6 months as the example. At that 6-month point, we're done, and we start saving in month 7. Now, we're not going to save the entire $200,000 run rate in the first month, but if we ramp that up over a 2 or 3 month period so that we're in full savings mode in that 3rd month after implementation. I actually have not done the math on the page here, but at the end of that process, you are, if you apply all of your costs, which in this size of a client would typically be about $500,000 in the first year, with a significant reduction after that. So you've got an implementation and then ongoing fees. So if you account for all of that implementation and the monthly fees for paying for the software in that first year, you still get to, in that 3rd month after implementation, a full cumulative net return on the investment, so cash positive on the entire project. So if anybody cares to, I can send a spreadsheet to you afterwards and share with you the details of how we get there. So again, all hypothetical for the sake of this discussion, but I do want to share with you some real life customer examples and talk a little bit about, as we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, some of the drivers that led these very, very different companies down this path and some of the benefits that they've seen. So I've got four quick examples here of shippers across very different industries. First one here is a global chemical manufacturer in North America. They've got 30-plus sites in Europe, another 30. So we're deploying across all their North American and European facilities, and they're live and have been for several years. The real driver here, frankly, was a shipper with very complex transportation requirements, everything from rail shipments to bulk and intermodal shipments to international shipments, LTL shipments, and so forth. So a lot of complexity, a lot of shipping locations, quite a bit of shipment volume, and shipping across a couple of continents. And so their real driver in this implementation was to get better control over that entire network, get much better visibility into their costs, get control over their freight payment activities, and improve their audits, and so forth. And so again, very complex network, and looking to grab control over a very wide and diverse transportation footprint. Second example here, very different environment. This is a European automobile manufacturer shipping from really 2 primary facilities in Europe, but overall 12 shipping locations. Shipping cars, finished vehicles into 120 different countries, shipping about 500,000 cars on an annual basis. Very different driver here. So this particular shipper historically was outsourcing all of their transportation, including inbound and outbound logistics, to a third party. Their corporate, the company was sold to a new owner, and the new owner basically looked at their logistics costs and said, not happening. Your logistics costs are way over industry norm, so do something about it. And so this particular shipper had to hire a staff and bring in a TMS solution to take over that transportation planning, optimization, execution, booking with carriers, both ocean, land, rail, truck carriers on a global basis, and then be able to get visibility of that. So be able to tell their dealers, that an ETA on a car, and then any in-transit hiccups, any failures at the port, any shutdowns at the plant, be able to communicate all of that information out to the dealer, out to the final end buyer, what the expected delivery dates would be. And so given some interesting contract negotiations and activities, we ended up with 5 months to implement this, and we're able to get up and running with, as I mentioned, pretty significant footprint here in a 5-month period, including integration with the carrier base. So that was interesting. Took a few years off of several of our lives, and which were devoted mostly to overnight travel. Another very different scenario here, and I realize I have a typo here. This is a commercial equipment manufacturer that grew entirely through acquisition over the last 20 years. That 20 actually is a 320 shipping locations in North America and Europe, and a significant carrier base, large shipment volumes. And the real driver here was, back to one of the points I made earlier, we're negotiating great freight rates, we're negotiating with national carriers, we've got good contracts in place with our carrier base, but we have absolutely no control over what all of these 320 facilities are doing from a day-to-day shipping standpoint. So this was entirely all about getting that day-to-day control, giving each of the shipping facilities a tool to automate that route guide that used to be sent by Excel spreadsheet, to automate that route guide, push a button, get the tenders out to the carriers, and do full execution. And then at the end of the day, bring all of those freight bills back into a consolidated, centralized place in order to do a better job of managing those. So again, very different drivers, significant savings, significant return on that investment. Okay, and just one last one here, and I actually have some numbers here I can share with you on the next slide, but this is a large lawn care products manufacturer selling primarily into the big box environment, so Lowe's, Home Depot, Walmart, so forth. These guys actually used to have a historical or a land-based or behind-the-firewall TMS solution that they had been using for years. As did many at the time, they had bought $1 million worth of software and implemented about a third of it. So they weren't getting all the benefit that they could. They had not connected to their carriers except for the freight payment process. They were using a separate, mostly manual solution for optimizing to create multi-stop deliveries out to their distribution facilities and to their customers. As you can see here, a significant number of shipping sites and carrier base and a large footprint. These guys actually presented with us at a conference earlier, actually last year, and so I can share with you some of the savings that they got. So I bring up, back this, bring the theoretical savings wheel and apply some real numbers to it. So without again sharing the dollar figures for everything, there was a 6% savings on their LTL spend through optimization into multi-stop truckload and an improvement over their manual semi-automated process. Because of the large number of shipping facilities, and because of their high degree of last-minute, same-day, next-day order requirements, the facilities tended to drift off their routing guide pretty significantly. And so by plugging in the TMS, they got a 26% improvement in their adherence to their routing guide. So save significant money in just using the number 1, number 2 carriers on a much more consistent basis. They saw a 3% reduction in their, and this is reflected in their freight spend, but it's actually about a 35–50% reduction in actual headcount reduction on automating their in-house activities. So they previously had a good-sized central organization managing the day-to-day optimization, planning, and execution. They were able to reduce that group by about 2/3, and then also reduce the out in the facilities activity significantly as well. So net, based on their estimate, was about actually a 50% reduction in the overall labor component of the transportation process. This was the bigger shocker, and it's 5%, but it's 5% across their entire freight spend. So they saved. They had actually already automated their freight payment activities, but because of the inability to really audit at the granular level and capture the details on the invoices, they hadn't really tightened down all of their tolerances. So by plugging in the TMS, they actually saved 5% across their entire freight spend just in the invoice audit process. They're also able to use the network to their advantage. So the TMS, as I mentioned, is about 15,000 carriers in total plugged into the network. And most of our shippers are using that network to go out and find additional capacity, find carriers that have a good concentration in and out of their key facilities. And then using that information then to go out and develop new relationships and expand their carrier base and really utilize the carrier base to their advantage in terms of reducing the overall cost of their contracts. They also saved about $120K by retiring existing systems. And another big significant one is they saved significantly on their brokered freight. So they had been tendering a lot of freight out to brokers when they were having trouble getting shipments covered. So they brought that back in-house using the TMS then to drive that brokerage and that sort of day-to-day broadcast activities. And net saved about $6.5 million in total transportation. So a significant savings, obviously, and you know, I think if we really did the math on this particular implementation, because it's a much larger freight spend, I believe actually that they were net positive in the second month after the implementation. So it's a huge savings and really offset the investment quickly and significantly. So how do you get there? You know, I mentioned that you know, these projects typically are 12 to 24 weeks. Again, one of the big savings or one of the big return and ROI drivers is that time to value. The biggest part of the project really is in this middle part where we're doing development of interfaces, but from our customer's order management system to the TMS, and doing a lot of testing. So that's typically a 4 to 8 week process of building interfaces and loading master data and so forth. The discovery and implementation process is pretty quick. The cutover is quick, as I mentioned, because we're able to do onboard a significant number of carriers very quickly. And so, again, we do see most of our projects, I would have to say the average is probably 5.5 months. But we've done some 3-month projects for significant shippers. In fact, we just went live with a customer that ships about 30,000 shipments a year. But the complexity here was interesting with a lot of domestic LTL and truckload freight and about 24,000 import-export containers on an annual basis. And so a pretty broad swath of ocean carriers as well that drove some real complexity there. But again, we just went live in the last week and a half, and it was a 12-week project. So That's really what we wanted to cover here. Hopefully made the point clear that given the right scope, the right approach in the implementation, given the right focus from an IT department that's ready to go and ready to get off the ground. Again, we're able to get up and running quickly, and the return on these projects, and this is really sort of the message that we hope our logistics managers and folks out there are really driving in their organizations, that this isn't an ERP implementation where it might take 3 years to get any kind of return on a $6 million investment. This is a TMS implementation. You're going to be up and running in 6 months, and in that third month after implementation, you've paid for everything, and so everything else from there on is on the plus side. So with that said, I just want to thank you all for joining. Thanks for taking a bit of time out of your afternoon for joining with us. I know I've gone through a lot of material here in a pretty quick period of time, but please either respond to an email that you received from us, or you can see the contact information for Ken, best person to contact if you have any further questions and want to take a deeper dive and dig into this. So again, I appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll run across you at some point in the near future. Take care.